and welcome to Literary Prospects, where we talk to authors and other literary professionals about books, publishing, and the writing life. I'm Kelley Vick, the host of the program, and it's my pleasure to introduce today's guest, author Miciah Bay Gault. Miciah Bay Gault is the author of the novel Goodnight Stranger, which was nominated for a Shirley Jackson Award, longlisted for the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize, and selected for Poets and Writers First Fiction Roundup. Miciah is a Breadloaf Fellow and a Vermont Arts Council Creation Grant recipient. Her short fiction and essays have appeared in Tin House, the Harvard Review, the New York Times, and others. She teaches in the MFA in Writing program at Vermont College of Fine Arts and is coordinator of the Vermont Book Award. Miciah Bay Gault, I am so happy to talk with you today. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. You are a pillar of the literary community. You teach, you coordinate book awards, you've edited and written for top literary journals, and your novel, Goodnight Stranger, was a finalist for the Shirley Jackson Award and longlisted for the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize. George Saunders has said about you, somewhere the ghosts of Shirley Jackson and Henry James of The Turn of the Screw are smiling because a wildly talented young writer has joined their lineage. The Boston Globe says Gault writes taut, evocative prose, conjuring specters of spirit and memory. And Cosmopolitan called your novel one of the best literary thrillers you'll read this year. So we have a lot to talk about today.
Well, you're very generous. Thank you for that nice intro. I'm already blushing.
Let's start out with talking about your novel, Goodnight Stranger. So how would you describe the story? What can you tell us about it?
Well, basically it is about grown-up siblings, Lydia and Lucas, who live a kind of somewhat isolated life on, an island. It's a fictional island off of Cape Cod and Martha's Vineyard, which is the area where I grew up. So I love that area, but I wanted to sort of set it in a fictional place, so I could have a little more control over my setting. Mm-hmm. So they have grown up there, sort of isolated and pretty haunted by the death of a sibling when they were babies. When they were born, they were triplets. One died as a baby, and they've really been, their whole family was haunted all these years by sort of what might have been, like a psychological haunting. But when the story starts, their parents have now died. They're alone together, still living in the house that they grew up in. A stranger shows up on the island, and they begin to believe deeply that this is their sibling come back to them in some form. And the mystery is sort of them unraveling whether that's true or not.
It is such a wonderful and atmospheric and strange and intricate literary thriller, really. So I'm curious about how the story evolved. Like, what was the spark that started this for you? What was the way in?
Yeah, I mean, really. So I read a personal history in the New Yorker a long time ago, decades ago. That was really just it was about somebody's struggle with infertility and sort of all the sort of possible pregnancies that didn't take, and the grief and the loss, and then it ended happily with the birth of a daughter, if my memory serves me right. And I just thought, for some reason, I thought about that daughter growing up, kind of thinking about the siblings that she didn't have or wouldn't have, and just like, mm-hmm. I wondered if this person that I read about had grown up haunted by the idea of the siblings she never had. And then somehow that really stuck in my mind, and I just had an image. Often when I'm writing, I just start with one premise, like a scene that raises a question that then I want to answer. So in this case, what I saw was this grown up. I saw two people facing each other across a threshold, like across the doorway. And I saw one of them saying, "It's him, like he's come back, it's him." And I was like, oh, what does that mean? What, and then I had to sort of figure out my story from there. But that's the first thing I saw, that scene. Um, so
Does
that
that
was
work?
it.
Is that how it is for you often when you're starting a story? It's like a scene that comes to you?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's like a premise, like, what if, this happens?
Mhm.
What if? And I just get really stuck on it. I can't stop thinking about it. That's how it works for me almost always. Short stories. I don't know how, and it's tricky because then you have to do the work of figuring out what it means, what's going to
Yeah.
happen. The story never comes to me fully formed ever. I always have to solve it. Um,
Well, speaking of beginnings and starts and ways in, you have a theory about first lines, and you used it for the first lines of Goodnight Stranger. So I'm going to read the first few lines now. Baby B was our brother, and he'd been dead all our lives. For a long time, I thought I'd see him again. But by the time I was 28, I believed that the dead stay dead. I knew that the space he left in our lives would have to be filled in other ways. Great first lines. So,
thank you.
can you talk about how this became the first few lines of the book?
Yeah, I mean, okay, well, I have a couple theories about
Yeah.
first line. So what happened with this is that I was working with Juliana Baggett, the writer,
Mhm.
who is just someone I trust. You have those sort of friends and mentors in your life who you just trust what they have to say. And I was working on the book. I mean, it was this was sort of when I was still getting ready to send it out, and I said, I'm really struggling with the opening. And she said, you should just try to summarize the entire book in your first line. Just see if you can sum it up in one line. And I was like, okay, if Juliana tells me to do that, I will. And so I tried. I feel like I didn't get it in the first line, but I got it in the first couple lines. It just to me feels like that's the book in a
Mhm.
nutshell. And that's what's happening. That's the kind of emotional story of the book. And then is that the one you meant, or I have another theory about
Yes,
first
but I'd like to
lines
know what the
that
other theory is too.
because I think I've told
Don't
you
hold
about this.
out.
So, first lines, I think have a really important job um, of they have to sort of both answer and ask questions all at the same time. So the answering questions is sort of like they need to orient the readers to some extent. So readers go into a book or a story with questions already. So they go in and they're saying, who's telling the story? What's the story about? What kind of a story is this? And where is the story taking place? Like those questions are just kind of there when we begin. And so if a first line can answer at least one of those, maybe two, we feel relaxed as a reader. But if we feel too relaxed, if they don't also raise questions, we're not as interested in keeping going. So the best openings need to both orient the reader and answer some questions while raising others. I mean, it's a tall order, but there's actually a great Lit Hub essay by Allegra Hyde about great opening lines where she talks about this. She has a different words for talking about it, but it really sums this up. And then she goes still further to actually say that the best opening lines are also kind of about time and death. And she has a lot of great examples. It's worth looking at.
Time and death. Like,
Mhm.
how? I mean, I know, well, of course, we're all going to go and read the essay, but I'm intrigued by that.
Yeah, I mean,
Like,
she sort of she surveyed a lot of people to see what their favorite first lines were, the most
uh,
memorable first lines,
uh,
and then that was the thing that she saw across them all. They all sort of had this element of talking about time and death.
wow.
Interesting.
That is really interesting. I guess that's things that we all have questions about and can relate
Yeah,
to, right? I mean, talking about raising questions.
yeah.
Um, let's talk about setting for a minute. You said you're the fictional island, Wolf Island, you built for this story. It's so beautifully rendered. I mean, you really feel like you can not only see, but like feel and hear and taste the salt in the air of this place. And I know as writers, this is what everyone is supposed to do. It's what we're all, striving for, but you just do it so damn well.
Thank
So
you.
how did you conceptualize Wolf Island and capture it so beautifully on the page?
Well, I mean, just sort of in terms of atmosphere, it feels a lot, I made it up so those streets don't exist and those shops don't exist and those houses don't exist. They're just from my imagination. But in terms of atmosphere, it's really similar to where I grew up, which is Cape Cod. I moved there the summer before I started high school, so I feel like it was just a kind of formative time in my life, like not just sort of socially and all the ways you think of, but like my senses were receptive in this certain
Mm-hmm.
way, if that makes sense. So I sort of
Mm-hmm.
moved there. Right around then is when you sort of become the person you sort of are going to be for the rest of your life in a funny way. And so I moved there, and just the, all of all of the pieces that make up the kind of sensory experience of that place just made such a big impression on me, like the color palette and the smells and the textures. And I mean, I loved it so much. So it was easy for me to create a place that wasn't my home but felt like my home in that way. And it's just where I wanted to go. I wanted the book to take place on an island for thematic reasons. But I just liked going there. I wanted to go to a place that had that, in my imagination. When you're really working on a thing and when you're really working on a project, and then you sort of go there anytime your mind has the space to. So like when I'm falling asleep or, down a
Mm-hmm.
long drive, I mean, I would just go there. And it was just a pleasure to go there because in terms of a sensory experience, it was where I wanted to be.
Do you
So
find that you want to like create settings like that in your stories, that places that you want to be? Um,
yeah,
Often?
I mean, maybe I definitely do. I mean, I think about that a lot. Maybe that's who knows what would happen if I made myself create a setting where I didn't want to be.
Yeah.
That could that could have an interesting, another level of tension. But I definitely think a lot about the places where I want to spend time in my
Hmm.
mind if I'm gonna be there, especially with a novel where you're there for so long. Yeah. So
How?
do you do that? Don't you do that?
Oh, I was just thinking about it. I mean, I guess I do. Yeah.
Yeah.
But then my mind went to, I'm reading a lot of horror and stuff lately, and it's like, oh, well, those people, if you're writing that all the time, you probably have to spend a lot of time in places that you wouldn't want to be. And how does that work?
Yeah, although weirdly, I mean, I don't know, I'm thinking about like my favorite horror books recently, like like I loved The Changeling, the
Hmm.
Victor LaValle, or like I mean, that I love Shirley Jackson,
Oh
and
yeah, yeah.
um just some of the books that I've read, you do want to go there. Like there's something really beautiful about it and almost cinematic about those kind of landscapes or cityscapes or wherever they are. And then they're scary, like things happen when you're there that are terrifying, but there's this beauty to it. So I don't know.
I just started thinking about Hill House, and at first I thought, well, you wouldn't want to hang out at Hill House, and I thought, but no, actually, the way that I picture it initially in my mind is actually like a
Kind of
beautiful
beautiful.
place. Yeah, in its
And
own
like,
weird, dark way.
I don't know, those scenes of like something rippling through something kind of
Yeah.
invisible rippling through the grass
Mhm.
out in the lawn. I love those scenes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Hmm.
that's really cool. How how did you come up with the name Wolf Island? I'm assuming that there was a lot of thought put into that.
There was, I mean, for a while it was called um like Devil's Island or something like that. I wanted it to have a kind of dark, a
Mhm.
darkness, just to kind of feel dark, but I didn't want it to resemble any real island name at all. Yeah, so Wolf Island, I just wanted to have that kind of like dangerous. I just wanted it to feel kind of
Hmm.
dark, like that sense of a predator. But I also like the sort of fairy tale sense of Wolf Island. It'd be different if it were like Raptor Island or
Yeah.
something. It's like still a predator, but it doesn't have that kind of fairy tale feeling. And so I think that was it. Yeah, the name of the island changed a few different times. Um, while I, yeah, that's right. But I like where it ended up. It
How did
felt
you come
nice.
up with the title of the book? Did you have a different working title or did you?
Oh gosh, yes, I had multiple other working titles. It was called Water Child for a while, sort of that idea of like a baby being a spirit in the air that could be reborn to you again. That's the like
Mhm.
term for that sort of translates to water child. And then I changed it to water baby for a while, which I liked, but my editor didn't really said, felt too I don't know, like fairy tale, or my friend said it sounded like a spring break rom-com for college students or something. So I couldn't call it that. And we just came up with lists and lists and lists of different titles, my editor and I, and that was sort of one of the ones that ended up on the list, and we went with it. We liked it because it had that like Goodnight Moon kind of,
Mhm.
it had that little nursery rhyme kind of resonance. Yeah,
Mhm. It works.
yeah,
An
it is.
interesting thing about this story is that the main characters, Lydia, the narrator, and her brother Lucas, um, as you mentioned, they're feeling this intense grief over the loss of their brother. Um, but they never actually really knew him because he died
Hmm.
when they were a few weeks old. So this idea of like deeply feeling the loss of someone that
Hmm.
you never really knew is so interesting. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, I mean, that is exactly what was interesting to me about it. Like the sort of grief, not for what had been, but for
Mhm.
what could have been. And
Mhm.
I mean, I haven't maybe asked myself why that was so fascinating to me, except that maybe as writers, we're always constructing different realities, right? So
Mhm.
maybe that was a habit I've developed from childhood of thinking about what could have been. I mean, I, that definitely was the thing that felt so haunting and interesting to me about their dynamic and what I wanted to explore. I think I sort of grew up like I was an only child with a single mom, and I had this like really wonderful, magical childhood. And it was like a little lonely. I
Mhm.
really I admired sitcom families that
Mhm.
you know what I mean, from the 80s and 90s that had, just lots of kids. And so maybe I had a sort of like loneliness or spent a lot of time thinking about what could have been a sort of different family. And maybe I was putting that energy or that kind of longing into the book. Possible.
And they live in a big, lonely house, and they say
Oh.
that they don't have any guest rooms, but they have plenty of ghost rooms.
Yeah.
Um, what do you think, and we've been using this term haunted, already a few times. What do you think it really means to be haunted?
Oh my gosh, that's the question, isn't it? That's what you're figuring out.
Mhm.
um, what does it mean to be haunted? I mean, I, you know, I think that's why we love ghost stories, because the idea of haunting exists on so many levels. So the idea that you're literally haunted by a literal ghost being in your house is fascinating. We love that idea. I always wanted to see ghosts. I wanted to be haunted my whole life, In college, people used to see a ghost. There was a big mansion um kind of abutting the college campus where I went, and people used to see a ghost there all the time, and I never saw her, and I was so envious. Um there's a ghost at Vermont College of Fine Arts, Anna. We know all about her background and how she died. It was in a love triangle. People see her ghost and hear her, and all sorts of things happen. I always wanted to have more ghostly experiences, but it's not, so the literal kind of idea of haunting, I think, is just made more exciting when you understand it in these other levels. And, I mean, right, you're haunted by a ghost that can't kind of depart, that can't let go of life and is sort of hanging around. But I mean, as writers, that's our sort of um that's that's our job, is to sort of be haunted by ideas or images or characters or thoughts that we can't let go of, and hang around until we make art out of them. So this idea of haunting is a little bit, it's similar to just obsession and sort of um the sort of delightful like preoccupations that writers get really good at honing, cultivating. And I mean, I think also, I don't know, one thing that's so interesting to me about ghosts is just the question of what remains when the the live human part of you has departed. Something is left behind. And what is it? The most human part of you? Is it the least human part of you? Either way, that is like one of the questions of novelists, for me, like sort of understanding humanity and understanding it to the point that you're writing about a character that is sort of either boiled down to some human essence, or the human essence is the thing that's gone and the what's left behind is something else. Either way, it's like really illuminating in terms of just understanding humanity and humanness more. So that's of the utmost interest to me, both in reading and writing.
The idea of the escalation of the strange, taking a possibly supernatural element, as we've been talking about, and weaving that into what is otherwise a realistic world on the page, is something that you explore in your own work and in the work of others. So I'm curious who you think does it well and what makes it work.
Oh, yeah. I mean, my favorite is Shirley. I mean, I love Shirley Jackson so much. And it's exactly what you're talking about. It's just this sort of subtle weaving of the strange into the everyday. And so what it does that I love is it makes the everyday stranger, and it makes the strange ordinary. And that blurring of the edges between the two feels really exciting to me in her work. I actually think John Cheever does that in his short stories. I feel like people don't read John Cheever very much anymore, but all of his were that same, many of his stories were that same kind of blurring of the strange and the ordinary, in ways that were delightful. I love, I love The Changeling, like I said. I love, what's the Stephen Graham Jones book that I love so much? Have we,
The Only Good Indians.
yes,
Okay.
yes. That one is so beautiful and so strange. I mean, just classic horror, but again, just the blurring, I think, is what is so interesting to me. But I don't mean, it's not that I want to be able to explain strangeness away using psychology, or, I would rather read the strangeness or the supernatural kind of literally. But I like the books that blur the lines in such a way that just invite the strangeness into the everyday life and invite that ordinariness into the strangeness, if that makes sense.
It does. I love that idea of inviting the strangeness in and making it
Yeah.
more ordinary, but also still interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I know you just talked with Julia Fine about the upstairs
Mhm.
house. I loved the upstairs house for that exact reason.
Yes.
I thought it just blurred the lines. And I mean, in her book, it blurred the lines between history and today and between kind of academic thought and
Mhm.
other kinds of thought. And all of those blurrings made for just a really, I mean, it's just delightful to experience that sort of strangeness when it's handled well.
What was the road to publication like for you?
Oh, yeah. Well, it was long. I worked on this novel. I worked on Goodnight Stranger for a very long time, like maybe 15 years. I mean, and I was doing a lot of other things during that time, like writing other things, um, having babies, getting married, working full time. There was a lot. It was life, but I think it took 15 years or more. And so um I finished the book. I mean, I also feel like I always like to tell people I'm pretty sure I did like 80 drafts of this book. I mean, it was just like so many revisions. There was so much about creating a novel that eluded me. I mean, I really struggled to find the structure. I struggled with pacing. It just was you know, I don't know. I was teaching myself as I went. I don't know why it was so hard for me to see. But I kind of got to a point where I had an agent. I had published a piece in Tin House. And after that essay came out, an agent contacted me and just asked if I had a novel, and I did. And we started working together. It all seemed to happen really magically, like just all came together. We worked on it together for a couple years. We had a draft we thought was completely ready to go and sent it out, and it didn't sell, and which is a little devastating, of course.
Mhm.
And then we had sort of gotten enough feedback from editors about what maybe it needed, and we gotten a few invites to resubmit. So we worked on it together. My agent is Jenny Ferrari Adler at Union Literary. We worked on it together for another 2.5 years. Um, and I have a really good writing friend. He's my best friend from grad school. His name's Dan Torday, a novelist. And I don't know why I hadn't ever sent it to him, but finally I was like, I really need help. I'm going to send you my novel. Can you help me? I was like, something's wrong with the plot. Everyone's saying that it kind of sags, the tension sags in the middle. It doesn't have enough forward momentum. So tell me what to do with the plot. And he read it and he was like, okay, the plot is fine. You can leave the plot alone, but the character needs more agency. Things are just happening to her. She's not making them happen. So he's like, I think you go
Hmm.
through, and every time something kind of big happens, it can still happen, but just change it so that it happens because of something the character does. She makes it happen. And I did it, and it changed everything. And it was done, and we sent it out again and it sold immediately. It was kind of amazing.
Wow.
Yeah. So, for instance, this happens in like the first couple chapters. The stranger comes, Lydia sort of sees him, he's handsome. And in the past, in the earlier drafts, he sort of was like maybe kind of interested in her, sort of I don't know, just had this kind of like energy with her. She was really resistant to him being around. He and the brother connected way before she did. So he was sort of in her life against her will. And I was
Mhm.
like, okay, if I'm changing everything so that she makes it happen, I mean, I literally changed it so that she kind of hit on him one night in a bar, and invited him home with her. And then almost immediately after, they started to believe that he was like this brother, but she had invited him into her life. So it just made her a little more, it implicated her in sort of all the complications that were to come, which was more dramatic and interesting. I mean, it really changed things. Yeah, and that felt like the key in that case. So, then it finally sold, and and that was it.
Do you think I'm wondering, like, this novel is specifically like a first person narrator point of
Mhm.
view, I just love this idea of making sure that the main character has agency in their
Yeah.
decisions the whole time. I wonder if it becomes any more important with like a first person than like a
Like a
third
third
person.
person?
I guess it's probably the same. I'll leave it to you.
I don't know. I mean, I just I'm not sure. I mean, here I am sort of trying to finish my second novel, and I think about that a lot. I'm like, do things need to happen to my character? Or do they need to happen because of things my character does? It's third person right now, at least, the book that I'm trying to finish. So I think I don't think you always need to have your character have that kind of agency. I mean, there's so many different kinds of books, but I think if one of the troubles is narrative tension or forward
Mhm.
momentum, that's one way to address it for
Great.
sure. Hmm.
Let's talk about genre for a minute. We've been talking about, I did described your novel earlier as a literary thriller. Um, and there's been a lot of really great writing coming out in the last few years that's tense and dark and strange and telling stories that would probably be considered horror, but they
Hmm.
also have really wonderfully styled prose and character development and exploration of these like really deep, smart themes. So I'm wondering what you think about that. Like, what makes something literary and what makes it genre? And is there even much of a line anymore?
I mean, I don't think, I think the line is completely blurred. I mean, okay, so I do think that there is genre writing that involves a kind of equation that you must get right. So if you're writing a romance novel, there are certain beats that you need to have in
Mhm.
order for that to be a successful romance novel. It's hard to write a genre novel. If you're
Mhm.
writing a detective novel, there are certain beats that need to happen in order for it to be a detective novel. So it's like writing a sonnet. You,
Mhm.
if you don't follow some of the conventions, you have not written a sonnet. So
Mhm.
for those genre pieces, like if you follow those conventions, you get the genre piece. But you can borrow from, I mean, a romance novel, it's a story about love and
Mhm.
longing. So you can borrow as much of that as you want for a literary book, because what better thing to write about than love and longing?
Mhm.
Um, a literary thriller, there's tension, there's a ticking clock, there's a mystery to be solved. You can borrow all of that for a literary book, and and it just makes it more tense and exciting to read. So in a funny way, I mean, I think that the kind of idea of the literary novel,
Mhm.
it makes sense to me that you would borrow from all of these genres. The reason people love to read those genres is because they're literally about the most human things in existence, like love and fear of death and mystery. So we borrow from that for a literary novel, but in a literary novel we don't necessarily follow the conventions. We're a little more interested in rule breaking. um so that's the only distinction really. And you can use literary elements like you were saying, like character development and beautiful sentences, and kind of complicated thematic, complicated
Mhm.
themes. You can use those in your genre fiction, and as long as you're following those conventions, it is still that genre,
Mhm.
but just a kind of literary. So the term literary thriller is, I mean, there's a lot of room within that, right? Like there's a mystery to be solved. There's often a ticking clock. There's this element of danger. I mean, that could describe a lot of novels. So that's like a very broad term within literary thriller. If there's like a detective novel, that needs to have sort of certain, by this page, you have to have a certain um, uh, lead that you're following. You think it's this person, but then you need to have a reversal or whatever the conventions are. Does that make sense? Right. I mean, the crossover makes sense to me because I feel like it's like the sonnet. It's like with a sonnet, like if you're not following those conventions, it's not really a sonnet, but to ignore all of the things that sonnets do in your poetry would be weird. Like, of course, you can make use of rhyme or of meter or of certain, number of lines. You could do that all you want, and that's beautiful. But
Mhm.
for it to be a sonnet, you would follow the kind of formula.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. I like thinking about it like that, like the borrowing, and especially
Yeah.
sonnet and poetry. That
Yeah.
makes things more clear for me than they ever have. But I always sort of struggle with the term literary. Like, what really makes it literary? I feel
Yeah.
like, and then, there's well, if it becomes commercial, is it not literary? And it's like, well, I don't know. Commercial just means that you sold a lot of them.
Yeah.
So
I know commercial just means it appeals to a wide audience, right? Which
Right.
literary things can. So the lines are all blurred in every way.
You coordinate the Vermont Book Awards.
Yes.
Can
Yes.
you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, sure. That's one of my favorite things I've ever
Okay.
done in my life.
Oh.
I love the Vermont Book Award. I mean, I love it because it's literally my entire job is just to give money and attention to writers. Can you imagine anything better than that? It's great. Yeah. So yeah, it's been going on since only 2015, and
Mhm.
we started it at the college, at Vermont College of Fine Arts. So we just decided our state had no state prize the way that other states do, and we wanted one. So we created one, and we used to we would accept um, nominations for books in poetry, creative nonfiction, fiction, and children's lit. And we would have finalists in each of those categories. And then we would only have one winner. So it was fun. It was high stakes, but it was
Mm.
also a little bit impossible because the judges would have to compare children's books against poetry, against essays. I mean, it just felt like too much. And so now we're run after a little hiatus during COVID. When we got back up and running again, we are run by a partnership between the Vermont College of Fine Arts still and the Vermont Department of Libraries and the Vermont Humanities Council. Um, and we offer 4 prizes. So we offer finalists and then one winner in poetry, creative nonfiction, fiction, and children's lit. And it's great. So my role is just to sort of keep things moving. I put together the panel of judges. I sort of encourage, booksellers and librarians, independent booksellers and librarians in Vermont can nominate. So I encourage them to nominate books by Vermont authors. And then we put together a kind of a big party where we announce the winner every year in the spring. And it's just great. I mean, it is like community building, for writers. It's so much fun even to just talk with the judges about all of the great books that have been nominated and the feeling of being around people who are winning a prize. It's so amazing. I
You're
love
usually in
it.
a good mood, I'd assume.
Oh my God, yeah. Last year I wrote the winner's name in these like fancy little envelopes, and then I like got to bring them up and hand them to the announcer during the event. I feel like it's, a big fancy event. I love it. It's my favorite night of the year.
You also teach in the MFA program at Vermont College of Fine Arts. How did you come to teaching? I feel like we talk often on this podcast about, how authors get published, but it's equally interesting to hear how to get the other jobs, the elusive MFA teaching job. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I just love teaching. I love teaching because I love talking about, right. I want to talk about people's work. So
Mhm.
it's so much fun. What could be more fun than that? Talk about books, talk about people's manuscripts. Um, and I just love other writers. So it's a perfect job. I mean, how did I come to that? I got my MFA at Syracuse I graduated when I was 30, and then I just started teaching adjunct. I moved back to Vermont because my fiance was here, so I moved here for love and got married, and I just started teaching adjunct at a bunch of different colleges in the area. And then I knew about Vermont College of Fine Arts, but I couldn't quite figure out how I just was like, I want to work there. I want to be connected to that place. So, well, what I did was I was like, I had read about the president at the time was a novelist named Thomas Christopher Green.
Mhm.
And I was like, I just need to meet him somehow. And then I'll somehow convince him to hire me for something. So I was like, well, he's a novelist. I can just look at his author photo, and then I'm sure he'll come in to the coffee shop to buy coffee. And when he does, I'll recognize him and I can introduce myself. And then it happened just like that. I just sort of waited and introduced myself. And I was like, I would love to talk sometime about a way I could be involved in the college. It's really where I would like to work. And we had like a networking meeting. And then a few months after that, I guess they wanted to hire an editor for Hunger Mountain, our literary journal. So that was sort of how I got my foot in the door. I got hired as like it was 2 days a week. It was a really small job at first and became bigger. And then I started directing one of the programs, and then I started teaching in that program when my book came out, and now I'm teaching in the MFA in writing. It all just kind of, happened. But I mean, it's interesting. I feel like a lot of people who get their MFA think about teaching as the sort of only path, but teaching jobs are so hard to get. I mean, and my job, my low res teaching job, is very part-time. Do you know what I mean? I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes it feels full-time, but it's not kind of full-time work. And
Yeah.
so it's not like a tenure track job. It's not like the job that people talk about getting. It's wonderful. It works for me. It's perfect for me, but it wouldn't be perfect for everybody if they need sort of a bigger job. But there, and then maybe sometimes people think about editing, but I feel like people don't think about all the like arts administration jobs, the sort of administering a prize or working for a arts organization, or those jobs are really satisfying too. There's not like a ton of money in that work because it's the arts, but it's
But it's
it
satisfying
is
work.
satisfying. Yeah.
Have you always
Yeah.
known that you wanted to be a writer? Have you always written?
Yes, always. Like from the moment I could write words, I wanted to be a writer.
And it never wavered?
No, it never wavered. I mean, I will say that briefly after college, I studied writing in college. I moved out to Portland, Oregon, and would just spend like so much time in Powell's, the big bookstore, just like looking. I just wanted to be around books all the time. I just wanted to be with them, But then I was like, I think I need something practical. And I got a master's in education. I thought I would teach high school, which didn't last very long. Like this isn't this isn't gonna be right. Because I mean, in part it just was to, talk about sort of humanity and humanness, just like walking down the hall with all these kids and their big feelings was too much. um, so I taught high school for 1 year and then went back for my MFA.
Do you have a favorite writing exercise that just works for you?
I think my favorite, well, I have an exercise I like to do with students, and I kind of do it with myself too. And it's an exercise that I've taken from Ray Bradbury in a chapter of his book Zen and the Art of Writing. It's a long chapter title. Part of it is The Thing at the Top of the Stairs. And the premise of this chapter is really just about sort of finding ways as a writer to get in touch with your obsessions, your preoccupations, your fears, the things that you can't let go of, like what we were talking about. And he used to do this exercise where he would just write almost like titles, so he would write the stranger, the bell tower, the carnival, the maze, the bones, the baby, the old man, and it's sort of like each each thing on his list could be the title of a story. And often they were, like he would write these and then he would write a story with that title. But I love to do that exercise with students, and it becomes so interesting. Their lists are so beautiful, for one thing, and just so exciting. You can feel yourself get filled with this energy when you give yourself permission to write about the things that are most exciting to you for whatever reason. So I do that, and I do that with myself when I'm feeling stuck.
How do you know when a story is finished? I mean, with your own work and when you're looking at students' work, do you ever get that feeling of like, it's really done, or do you always feel like there could be more?
I I feel like it's really done when it's really done for my own work.
Mhm.
But I'm such a slow writer that it happens so rarely. I work on stories. I work on a ton of stories at the same time. I'm working on like 6 stories. I'm trying to write ghost stories right now. I'm working on about 6 at the same time. And I keep thinking at some point I'll just finish them all and I'll have 6 stories finished, but they're so, they're always in progress. They just go so slow. But in the past, when I've finished stories, I know they're done. I mean, I do a lot of revision. But
Mhm.
there just comes a point where I'm like, there's nothing more to do. This is
Mhm.
ready. I have noticed sometimes, both with my work and student work, sometimes you think you're done, but there's more to go. That you're
Mhm.
done and that you've sort of answered certain questions. You've done the thing you set out to do, but the story hasn't gone to the place it needs to go to feel, transcendent, or to feel like it's um lifted you out of the realm of the ordinary, that experience we look
Mhm.
for as readers. So sometimes I think people think they're done. Literally, they haven't written enough. There's another whole beat that needs to happen, or
Mhm.
maybe more than one, that takes you elsewhere in an exciting way. That's one thing I've noticed. Yeah. How do you know when you're done? How do you
I
know?
don't know. I've never had that feeling.
I know. I mean, I have writer who I wish I could remember who it was. I was just at a reading and someone was like, "Oh, I'm like revising before I read it," in their published book. You know what I mean? Like they were
Yeah.
like making changes before their reading in a book that had been published for years. So it's also possible that we're never really done and we just are done enough.
I think that's more the feeling that I had. Sometimes I just get to the point that it feels done enough, but I don't have that like, this is done feeling,
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Or I have that falsely. I'll feel it as I'm working. I'll be like, this feels like just about done. And then the next day I'll be like, oh no, that was
Never mind.
that was like a self-preservation issue. That was total delusion. Nowhere near done.
Are you like a plotter or a pantser, as they say? Do you ever outline, or do you tend to just go with the flow?
Oh, I wish I outlined. I feel like it would be so much easier, but I
Mhm.
just can't. I cannot do it. I have tried. I keep swearing that I'm going to, and I just can't do it. But I sort of do, I think it's maybe a little more recursive. Like I'll know where I'm starting, and then I'll write to a point where I'm like, okay, I don't understand what's happening here. I need to kind of take a step back and look, and then I'll maybe get an idea of an outline that I need to apply to it at that
Mhm.
point, and then I'll go
Mhm.
back and
Mhm.
sort of apply that outline in the next revision maybe. But then that always takes me somewhere unexpected. And so then I'm kind of off course again. And then I have to step back again and say, okay, wait, I need to apply an outline here. Like I need, so it's recursive. It goes in a circle, I think, really more than one or the other. It's a little bit of both throughout the whole process.
What does your writing routine look like?
Oh, I have no routine. Oh my God. I wish I could answer that and be like every day. I I'm like all over the place. I mean, I don't have a desk, so I write in my bed sometimes. My favorite place to write is in parking lots. I just drive my minivan to some like nice parking lot and write there. Like that's where I get the most done when I do that. Sometimes I'll like borrow somebody's house if it's going to be empty, and I'll try to go there really early. Like if I can go before sunrise, then I can
Oh, wow.
well, in the winter in Vermont, that's pretty easy. But
Yeah.
like if I can kind of go and no one's there, and I'm in this new place. I don't know. That's super inspiring for me. I get so much done. There's none of my own chores or the sort of, you know, all the stuff of my life is not around me. Yeah, I mean, I love to go. For a while, I had this great thing going on where I would go to my mom's house on the Cape, where one of the houses I grew up in, where
Mhm.
she'd be gone. I would meet some writing friends there, and we would just have maybe only like 3 days, but you can get so much done in 3 days when there's
Mhm.
nothing else,
Mhm.
and we would wake up and make a bunch of coffee and just write all day, and then stop maybe around 4 or 5 and walk to the beach and come home and make a cocktail and make dinner together. But we'd be talking about the work the whole time. So
Oh, that
even
sounds
then
great.
it was amazing. It was the best. I got so much done. You pack so much in. I mean, I love like a residency. I'm going to be at the Vermont Studio Center in January, and I know I'll get so much done there. I really love a sort of couple of days away. But my writing routine is like, I don't know. I had some great success the other night. I was making dinner, but I kept kind of thinking of lines for something I was working on. And I was like, you know what? I am just going to get my notebook and just kind of keep it open on the counter. And if I think of a line, I'll write it down. And I wrote like a whole draft of something kind of in between, like cutting onions and,
Wow.
sauteing mushrooms. I mean, it was just sort of having it open, and I would come back and forth between the two, and probably messed up dinner, but I
Well,
got a
you can
hotel
sacrifice the dinner.
thing. Yeah, it was amazing. So I'm like always just trying to find little ways to get the work done. There's no routine. I wish there were.
How do you keep everything organized?
I don't. I'm so disorganized.
Well, do you keep like different files on your computer or like journals
Yeah.
that you're working in at certain time, like
Yeah, I have one kind of notebook that I really love. And I'm always sort of writing in that, and I try not to write sort of teaching stuff in that. I'll have a different notebook for like writing notes about
Mhm.
teaching stuff or whatever, but I'll write just like journal entries or lists or free writes or work that I'm doing on a story or an article or something in there. I I mean, I sometimes like if I'm working on this article right now for poets and writers, and I have like a deadline coming, and I'm trying to really get myself to get some stuff down. I'll have to bring a notebook with me when I'll walk my daughter to school, and then on the way back, just kind of be
Mm.
thinking about it, and I can write as I walk. That works really well. So no, I don't
You
even
can
have
write
any.
as
I
you
have
walk?
no or yeah, I write as
That's
I walk.
wow.
Yeah, sometimes and then sometimes I'll have to stop, but yeah, no, I don't keep it organized. I don't know, it's all disorganized, but it all works out somehow.
That makes me feel so much better.
Are you organized? Do you have
No,
like no.
no.
No. I think there are writers who are organized, but I don't, I think some are more organized than me for sure. But it's all different ways work.
Yeah, there's like notebooks everywhere and
Huh.
like files everywhere on my computer and
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
no.
Yeah. Scraps of paper. Sometimes I just start writing something in my like calendar that's supposed to just be for to-do list. It's all over.
Yeah, I keep saying one day I'm gonna organize it all, but yeah. What do you know now that you wish that you had known before publishing your first book?
um, well, I mean, I I think people had said this to me, but maybe I didn't quite believe it, and I'm not sure it's helpful to know this beforehand. But um, there's no sort of like you haven't made it as a writer and now you've made it as a writer. It's not a two-tier system.
Mm.
It's just a constant kind of climb. And I honestly think that's good and best, and part of what I like about it. I'm very comfortable with wanting,
Mm-hmm.
and I think I like the sort of longing for a thing and the ambition, the wanting something more than
Mm-hmm.
I like having it, honestly. I mean, I think that the minute you accomplish something as a writer, you already want something different.
Mm-hmm.
You want to accomplish more, different, or a more complicated thing, a more ambitious thing. And that's as it should be. And that's good, because the attention that you get for the first thing you've accomplished fades away immediately. There's no sort of, do, do you know what I mean by that? Like, it
Mm-hmm.
can't be whatever that outcome is, publishing that first book, that feels really good, and it's really short-lived, and it's just almost immediately just about the work again. It's always just about the work,
Mm-hmm.
as long as that takes. And so, I mean, that's not, I think I kind of knew it before the book, but I don't think I really believed it. But I really believe it now. It's just always about the work. You have to love the work more than you have to love the attention or the outcome or whatever you think will come.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. Usual traditional last question.
Okay.
When Goodnight Stranger is made into a movie or series, what would you pick for the theme song?
Oh my God, for the theme song. Oh, now I keep that's amazing. I'm not sure I know the answer. Now I do like a playlist for every project I'm working on. And that way I can, like, when I'm going on a drive, or I can just sort of put it on and get myself into that. I was talking about sort of transporting myself to that place, and
Yeah.
a playlist can do that for me. So I have that playlist for various projects, but I didn't have one really for Goodnight Stranger. So I'm not sure. I mean, the only thing that's occurring to me is this hilarious song called Cape Cod Girls that I love, but I
I
think
don't know that song, but
it's just like a sea shanty kind of song. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I can answer that. I just don't know the answer to it. I just don't have it. I mean, okay. Well, here's something. There is some music in it. Like, I definitely talk about Nina Simone in there.
Mhm.
Nina Simone is an
Mhm.
important kind of song that's mentioned early on. I think there's some Tom Waits that they talk about.
Mhm.
So those would be on it. And that kind of makes sense to me. It kind of like moody, like, a kind of beautiful, moody, voicey sort of soundtrack is what I would put together.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for joining today.
Thank
It was
you.
really great talking to you.
I know, this was a great conversation. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on Literary Prospects. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. We'll see you next time.